The desert wind lashed against her face, carrying grains of sand that scratched her exposed skin. Aisha al-Harbi ran, not for sport or joy, but with the desperation of one fleeing a sealed fate. The moon, a silver crescent in the dark sky of Rub al-Khali, seemed to mock her audacity, illuminating just enough to reveal the merciless expanse swallowing her whole. Each step was a silent prayer, each breath a stolen gasp from impending death. She had traded the safety of her village, the warmth of her home, for the biting cold of night and the uncertain promise of a freedom she might never reach. What would you do if the only way out for your soul was to challenge everything you know, risking your very life? Prepare yourself for a story where the most desperate escape may, in truth, be the path to a love that defies all conventions. Aisha came from Al-Waha, a remote village where time seemed to have stood still, and life was woven into traditions as old as the dunes that surrounded it. Since childhood, she carried both the gift and the burden of being a weaver of ancestral carpets. Her hands, agile and sensitive, transformed threads into tapestries that were not mere objects but living chronicles, stories of her people, their gods, their deepest dreams and fears. Every knot, every color, was a piece of her soul, a silent diary where she kept what she could not say. But Aisha's destiny was not only in her skilled hands. In her early 20s, the weight of an arranged marriage hung over her like a shroud. It was a union of convenience, dictated by family honor and the needs of her people, an alliance that promised security but stole her voice. She would be given to a man who would accept her out of duty, out of alliance, but never for true love, she thought. A man who would see her art as a pastime, not as the essence of who she was. The idea of spending her life beside someone who would possess her without truly loving her was a torment that stifled her free spirit. Night after night, Aisha sat before her loom, her fingers dancing across the threads while her mind wove scenarios of escape. She imagined the vastness of the desert, not as a threat, but as an invitation, a gateway to a world where her art and soul could finally breathe. The pressure mounted with each passing day. The glances from her family, the whispered conversations in the village, all reminded her of her role, the expectation weighing heavily on her shoulders. She was the weaver, the daughter, the bride. But where was Aisha, the woman who longed for a love that recognized her completely? The decision came on a starless night, when the darkness seemed to embrace her resolve. She could not, would not submit to a fate that denied her the essence of her very existence. Believing that the only way to preserve her soul was to escape, Aisha packed a small bundle with the essentials, some water, dried dates, and most importantly, some of her threads and needles. Like a talisman, a part of her identity she would never leave behind. In the dead of night, while the village slept a deep, oblivious sleep, Aisha slipped out of her tent. Her heart pounded wildly in her chest, a drum of fear and excitement. Every shadow seemed like a guard. Every whisper of the wind, a voice of condemnation. She moved stealthily, dodging the dying campfires and sleeping tents, until she reached the edge of the village, where the sand merged with the infinite horizon. There, she glanced back one last time at the faint lights representing her entire life, then turned and took the first step into the unknown. At first, adrenaline propelled her. She ran, her sandals sinking into the soft sand, the cold air filling her lungs. Freedom felt like a new breath, an elixir intoxicating her. But the desert shows no mercy to the inexperienced. As the night progressed, the cold intensified, and the vastness began to assert itself. The dunes, once inviting, became impossible mountains, endless labyrinths. The water in her bundle dwindled with every sip, and hunger gnawed at her stomach. Fatigue weighed heavily on her limbs, and the initial courage gave way to an exhaustion that threatened to steal her hope. With each dune climbed, the same bleak, monochromatic landscape repeated. Aisha was lost, exhausted, and the desert's vastness transformed. With every passing moment, from a promise of freedom into a death sentence, the merciless sun began to rise, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. But for Aisha, it was merely the promise of another day of torment. The heat, once a distant threat, now became a suffocating embrace. Her lips were cracked, her throat dry, and her vision blurred from lack of water and food. Every step was a battle against her own body, which begged for surrender. The desert, which had promised freedom, now revealed itself as a silent predator, ready to claim its prey. She stumbled, the soft sand swallowing her feet, and felt her strength abandon her completely. The world spun, and the last thing she saw before darkness swallowed her was the infinite blue of the sky, as distant as the hope that was fading away. A strong scent of coffee and spices, mixed with the aroma of leather and fire, was the first sensation that pulled her back from the abyss. Opening her eyes with difficulty, Aisha saw a ceiling of richly embroidered fabric, unlike anything she had ever seen in her village. She was lying on a soft bed, wrapped in fine cloths, feeling a dull pain throughout her body, but her thirst and hunger had lessened. A tall, imposing man stood at a distance, watching her. His attire was of discreet yet unmistakable elegance, and his dark, piercing eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her hold her breath. It was a gaze that seemed to see through her soul, but without judgment, only contained curiosity. He said nothing, merely nodding toward a bowl of dates and a canteen of fresh water beside her bed. Hesitant, Aisha took the water and sipped it slowly, feeling life return gradually to her veins. The silence was heavy but not threatening. It was the silence of a man accustomed to command, yet who waited patiently. Who was he? And why had he saved her? She dared not ask, fearing that any word might shatter the fragile truce that had settled. In the days that followed, Aisha learned that she was in a temporary camp, a luxurious tent set up in the middle of the desert for an expedition. The man was Omar bin Rashid, a name that, if she knew the truth, would send chills through her veins. But he revealed nothing. Her identity, and Aisha, in turn, remained silent about her escape and her past. She was simply the desert woman, a mysterious figure he had found on the brink of death. Omar, accustomed to the bustle and superficiality of life in Dubai, noticed something different about her. There was a resilience in her weary eyes, a dignity in her silence that intrigued him. He saw the strength behind the fragility, the indomitable spirit that the desert had failed to break. Aisha, feeling the need to reciprocate the hospitality, began helping with the camp chores. Her hands, once dedicated to threads and needles, now served tea and prepared simple meals. But there was an urgency in her spirit, a part of her that yearned for expression. One day, while looking at the threads she had brought with her, almost like a survival instinct, she felt the call of her art. With Omar's permission, she set up a small makeshift loom and began to weave. At first, they were just simple patterns, reflections of her gratitude and the new hope beginning to bloom. But as her fingers danced over the threads, the stories of Al-Waha, the colors of her people, and the dreams that had driven her to flee started to take shape in every knot. Omar, a man of business and power, used to artworks worth fortunes but often lacking soul, found himself increasingly drawn to Aisha's work. He spent hours watching her, fascinated by the intensity with which she devoted herself to each rug. These were not just pieces of wool. They were living narratives, full of emotion and history. There was a depth, a purity in Aisha's art that he had never encountered before. She wove the soul of her people, their struggles, their joys, and above all, her own dreams of freedom. Through her rugs, Omar began to see Aisha not merely as the lost woman he rescued, but as a vibrant soul artist, a pure heart, and a quiet strength challenging him to see the world in a new light. With each passing day, the attraction between them grew, slowly and inevitably, like dunes shifting with the wind. An unexpected bond was forged in the solitude of the desert, a link of mutual respect and admiration transcending the barriers of their vastly different worlds. He, the powerful Sheikh, yet lonely in his wealth. She, the humble weaver, but rich in spirit. Whispered conversations beneath the desert's starry cloak revealed fragments of their lives, their burdens, and their longings. Aisha spoke of her village, the importance of her craft, but omitted the details of her escape in the arranged marriage. Omar, in turn, shared the pressure of his responsibilities, the superficiality of his world, without revealing the full extent of his power. But the desert, as vast as it was, could not conceal secrets forever. The truth, like the sand beneath one's feet, always finds a way to the surface. One night, while Aisha wove a carpet that told the story of a woman's courage in defying fate, one of Omar's men, sent on a reconnaissance mission, returned with troubling news. He had passed through Al-Waha, Aisha's village, and heard about a runaway bride and her family's desperate search. The arranged marriage, the honor at stake, all came to light, casting a shadow over the camp. Omar felt a chill down his spine. The woman he had rescued, for whom he felt an inexplicable attraction, was not merely a weaver. She was a runaway bride, and her destiny was intrinsically linked to a commitment she had renounced. The Sheikh, accustomed to resolving dilemmas with pragmatism, now found himself at a crossroads. Duty, honor, the traditions of his people, and the political implications of involving himself in Aisha's fate weighed heavily on his mind. Yet, against all of that, there was the feeling that had blossomed in his heart, a love he never expected to feel, a love that defied all rules and conventions. The revelation fell like a silent thunderbolt upon the camp, shattering the illusion of an isolated refuge. Omar, the powerful Sheikh, felt the weight of his world collapse upon the fragile bubble he had created with Aisha in the desert. His mind, always sharp and strategic, was now in turmoil, torn between what was expected of him and what his heart, against all logic, yearned for. He was a man of duty, of tradition, a pillar of his people. But, for the first time in his life, duty seemed cold, empty, incapable of filling the space that Aisha had unwittingly occupied in his soul. The image of Aisha, her resilience, her art that spoke of a profound truth, the whispered conversations beneath the stars, all of this mingled with the news of the arranged marriage, the family honor, and the implications of her escape. If he helped her, he would be defying not only a family, but the very foundations of a society that valued tradition above all else. If he handed her over, he would be betraying not only Aisha but himself, the man she had helped him rediscover. The night wore on, and Omar did not sleep. He wandered over the cold sand, his footsteps echoing the inner conflict consuming him. The desert, once a place of peace and reflection, now seemed like a spirit confronting him. With every dune, every star he saw Aisha's face, the weaver who had stolen his peace and, paradoxically, given him a new reason to fight. At the dawn of the next morning, with the sun painting the horizon in blazing hues, Omar found her sitting at her makeshift loom, fingers paused over the threads, eyes fixed on a distant point. She knew. The silence between them was more eloquent than any words. He approached, and Aisha lifted her gaze, a mixture of fear and resignation in her eyes. There was no accusation, only painful understanding. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible against the morning breeze. "You know who I am, a runaway bride, a disgrace." Omar knelt before her, an unusual act for a man of his stature. He took her hands, which trembled slightly. "No, you are Aisha, the weaver, the woman who showed me the beauty of a free soul." In that moment, conventions and family arrangements seemed distant, insignificant. The love that had blossomed in his heart, a love he never expected to feel, a love that defied all rules and traditions, was the only truth that mattered. He knew what he had to do. The decision was not easy, but it was clear. He could not lose her, not after having found her, not after seeing the world through her eyes. "I will take you back," Omar said, his voice firm but filled with a veiled promise. Aisha stepped back, the fear in her eyes intensifying, but not as a captor, as a protector. "I will fight for you, Aisha." Those words, "I will fight for you," echoed in Aisha's heart, who had always believed she was alone in her battle against fate. A spark of hope, fragile as a silk thread, ignited in her chest. It was a risk, a leap into the unknown. But beside that man, she felt that perhaps, just perhaps, there could be a future for her art and her love. The journey back from the desert was not an escape but a determined return. Omar did not take her back to Al-Waha, but to Dubai, to his world, the world of luxury and power. The arrival at the palace was a shock to Aisha. The grandeur, the sparkle, the bustling servants, and the opulence of the surroundings were a stark contrast to the simplicity of her village and the vast silence of the desert. She felt like an intruder, a stranger in a universe that did not belong to her. The fear of rejection and judgment wrapped around her like a heavy veil, She, the desert weaver, amidst jewels and silks, felt small and out of place. Omar, however, remained by her side, a safe harbor amid the storm of curious glances and whispers that followed them. He introduced her not as a guest, but as someone of importance, an artist whose talent he admired. He knew the road ahead would be arduous, but his determination was unwavering. It was not long before the news of the desert woman and her escape spread through Dubai's influential circles. Both families, upon learning of the situation, reacted with vehement opposition. For Aisha's family, her escape was a stain on honor, a challenge to ancestral traditions that could not be forgiven. For Omar's family believed that a man of his stature could not be involved with a woman of humble origins, already promised to another, who had broken the rules of her own culture. The social disparity and Aisha's prior commitment were cited as insurmountable barriers. Family gatherings were tense, filled with heated arguments and disapproving looks. Omar's mother, a woman of great dignity and strong attachment to tradition, tried to make him see the madness of his feelings. She reminded him of his responsibilities, of his role as a leader, and how a marriage like this could undermine his position and the reputation of his lineage. Aisha, often present during these discussions, felt the weight of being the cause of so much conflict. She saw the love in Omar's eyes, but also the pressure suffocating him. The belief that he would never truly love her, only out of duty, began to resurface in her mind, fueled by the relentless opposition from everyone around. She thought, how can a man like him, used to having everything, choose a desert weaver, a fugitive cornered over his duty and family? Doubt was a slow poison, corroding the hope Omar had ignited. She felt guilty, a threat to his world. Perhaps, she thought, it would be best to leave again, to disappear so he could resume his life, his duty. But every time she thought about leaving, the image of the relentless desert and the memory of the loneliness that awaited her paralyzed her. And, more importantly, the silent strength in Omar's gaze, which promised to fight, held her to a thread of hope. Despite overwhelming opposition, Omar did not give in. He refused to abandon Aisha. He had seen her soul, her art, her courage. He would not allow the webs of tradition or the veil of prejudice to smother the flame that Aisha had ignited in his chest. Omar's decision was not merely an act of rebellion, but a declaration that his kingdom, his life, would not be governed solely by duty, but by a love he, the powerful Sheikh, did not know he needed until he found her. He knew the battle would not be fought on the desert sands, but in the opulent corridors of his palace, against the voices of his own family, who saw Aisha as a threat to the established order. Each day, the pressure grew. Omar's mother, a respected matriarch, did not mince words to express her displeasure. She passionately argued about lineage, reputation, and the political agreements that an arranged marriage could bring. You are the pillar of our people, Omar. How can you risk everything for a woman who fled her own destiny, a stranger with no ties to our world? The words, sharp as daggers, struck Omar, but they did not make him waver. He saw the pain and concern in his mother's eyes, but also her inability to grasp the depth of what he felt for Aisha. He tried to explain, not with logic or pragmatism, but with the simple truth of his heart, something that seemed strange and dangerous in his world of negotiations and alliances. Meanwhile, Aisha watched the storm gathering around Omar, feeling increasingly like the epicenter of that chaos. The judgmental glances of the servants, the whispers trailing her through the palace halls, all reinforced the old belief that she did not belong there. She saw the determination in Omar's eyes, the way he defended her, but the poison of doubt still gnawed at her soul. How could a man of such wealth and power truly love her, the humble weaver who had fled an arranged marriage? Was it not merely a whim, a passing fascination with the exotic, the woman he rescued from the desert? Guilt consumed her. She felt she was ruining Omar's life, putting his status and family at risk. In moments of despair, the idea of running away again, of disappearing so that he could resume his life of duty and honor, seemed the only way out. But then, she remembered the relentless vastness of the desert, the loneliness that she waited, and the image of Omar's gaze, which promised to fight, held her to a thread of hope. He did not leave her alone. Amid tense meetings and disapproving glances, Omar found moments to be with Aisha, to show her that her worth transcended social conventions. He took her to the palace gardens, where the exotic flowers contrasted with the simplicity she so loved. He encouraged her to continue her weaving, providing the finest threads and a quiet space for her loom. Aisha, in turn, found solace in her art. Her rugs, once silent daily chronicles of her fears, began to transform. The colors grew more vibrant, the patterns more intricate, telling the story of her journey, her struggle, and the unexpected love that blossomed amid adversity. She wove Omar's strength, her family's pain, and the hope of an uncertain future. Her work began to attract attention, not only from Omar, but from others within the palace who, despite their opposition to her origins, could not deny the beauty and depth of her art. Some, secretly, saw in her rugs a bridge between the old and the new, between tradition and innovation. The tension, however, reached its peak when Aisha's original fiancé's family, from the village of Al-Waha, arrived in Dubai, demanding the restoration of honor and the completion of the arranged marriage. They brought with them tradition, duty, and condemnation, confronting Omar directly. The situation became unbearable. Aisha felt the ground slip from beneath her feet. This was the moment of truth. She saw the fury in her father's eyes, the shame in her mother's, and Omar's unwavering determination. She was about to step in, to surrender to end the conflict, to protect Omar from further disgrace, but he stopped her with a simple gesture. It was then that Omar, before both families, before all who opposed them, made his confession. His voice, once that of an imposing leader, now trembled with the passion and vulnerability of a man fully opening himself. He did not speak of duty, alliance, or convenience. He spoke of Aisha. I found her at death's door in the desert, and I thought I had only saved a life. But she saved me. She showed me the beauty I had forgotten, the truth my world of luxury had obscured. He looked directly at Aisha, his dark eyes overflowing with an emotion she never thought she would witness. I desire you, not out of duty or any alliance. I desire you because I love you desperately. I love your art, which tells stories of an indomitable soul. I love your courage, which made you defy an imposed fate. I love your pure soul, which made me see the world in a new way. In that moment, Aisha's world stopped. Omar's words, spoken with overwhelming sincerity, dismantled all her beliefs, all her doubts. He did not love her out of obligation, but for who she was, for her essence. The weaver who had always believed that no one would truly love her for herself, who would never be seen beyond her role or duty, realized the colossal mistake of her flight, not for having run away from the marriage, but for having run away from the possibility of a love so deep and true. That man, the billionaire Sheikh, the powerful leader, was there, exposing his heart for her. It was a love that defied everything, that broke down barriers. The families, shocked by the intensity of the declaration, fell silent. The air was heavy with a mixture of scandal and admiration. Aisha felt a new strength, a courage she didn't know she possessed. She was no longer alone. She was no longer the fugitive. She was the woman loved by a man willing to fight the world for her, and she was ready to fight alongside him. Together, they would face the obstacles, no longer as two separate individuals, but as a united front against the conventions and expectations of their worlds. The silence that followed Omar's declaration was more deafening than any scream of fury. Omar's mother's eyes, once full of reproach, now reflected a confusion mingled with reluctant respect for her son's passion. Aisha's family, who had come demanding honor, was stunned. They had never imagined that a sheikh, a man of such power and status, would bow with such vulnerability before a weaver from a remote village. Aisha's father's initial fury gave way to a dark perplexity, for the strength of Omar's love was a wall that their own tradition seemed incapable of breaking down. That moment marked a turning point. Not that all objections had magically vanished, but the undeniable truth of Omar's confession had shattered the armor of conventions that surrounded them. From that day forward, the fight would not be waged by Omar alone, but by both of them. Aisha, her spirit invigorated by the certainty of his love, lifted her head. She was no longer the ashamed fugitive, but the woman who had found her place in the heart of a man who saw her for who she truly was. The first steps were the hardest. Omar, with the determination of a leader who does not back down, initiated the process to undo Aisha's arranged marriage. It was not a simple task. It involved delicate negotiations with Aisha's family and the original fiancé's family, who felt dishonored. Omar, however, spared no effort. He used his influence not to intimidate but to mediate, explaining that the forced union would bring more disgrace than honor, and that true respect lay in allowing Aisha to follow the path of her heart. He offered fair compensation, not as a bride price, but as a goodwill gesture to make amends and ensure the future of Aisha's village, promising support and resources for the community's development. Aisha, for her part, did not remain silent. Strengthened by Omar's conviction, she spoke with her family, not with rebellion but with the dignity of a woman who had found her voice. She explained to them that her flight was not an act of disrespect, but a cry from her soul for authenticity. She showed them the rugs she had woven in the desert, the stories of her journey and rediscovery, proving that her art was more than a pastime. It was her essence, her freedom. At first, her relatives were shocked by her boldness, but the passion in her words and Omar's seriousness began to soften even the hardest hearts. The dissolution of the arranged marriage was a long and exhausting process, filled with back and forths, heated arguments, and moments of uncertainty. Society, accustomed to following unchanging rules, viewed Omar's audacity with suspicion. Whispers of scandal and disapproval still lingered around them, especially in the salons of Dubai. But Aisha and Omar faced every obstacle together. Every negotiation, every disapproving glance, every cultural barrier that arose only served to further solidify the bond between them. Omar took her to meetings, allowing her to express her point of view, showing everyone that she was not merely a pawn in his game but his partner. He encouraged her to continue her weaving, and it wasn't long before her art, once appreciated only by him, began to attract the attention of others. Omar arranged a small private exhibition at the palace, where Aisha could showcase her rugs, each telling a part of her story, her village, her escape, and her love. The vibrant colors and intricate patterns, which previously represented only the traditions of Al-Waha, now took on a new meaning in Dubai. They spoke of resilience, freedom, and a love that breaks barriers. Influential women and art collectors, initially skeptical, were captivated by the authenticity and emotional depth of her work. Aisha's art became an unexpected bridge, connecting the simplicity of the desert with the city's sophistication and, more importantly, linking hearts that once seemed irreconcilable. Omar's mother, who had initially opposed vehemently, began to see Aisha's art in a new light. She realized those rugs were not just beautiful pieces but the soul of a woman bringing a fresh perspective into her son's life. Omar's pride in Aisha, his genuine admiration for her talent and courage, were undeniable. The rigidity of his matriarch began to give way, replaced by a gradual acceptance, albeit with some reservations. Days turned into weeks, and Aisha's presence in Omar's palace was no longer a scandal but a new reality. She didn't fit perfectly in the mold of Dubai society, and Omar did not want her that way. He loved her for her uniqueness, for her untamable soul that refused to be contained. Together, they began to build a new life, a new path. The palace, once a symbol of duty and power, slowly transformed into a home, a space where art and love could flourish freely. There were still challenges, of course. Dubai society was complex and old traditions did not vanish overnight. But the union of Aisha and Omar was an undeniable force, a testament to the transformative power of love. They were not just breaking rules, they were rewriting them, showing that true love knows no boundaries of class, origin, or convention. Aisha, the weaver who fled the desert to escape an arranged marriage, had found not only freedom, but a love that accepted and celebrated her in her entirety. And Omar, the billionaire Sheikh, had discovered that the greatest wealth was not in his vaults, but in the heart of the woman who wove her own soul into every thread. Their journey was just beginning, but the foundation of their future was solidly built on the truth of their feelings and the courage to fight for what they believed in. They became a symbol, a silent legend in the corridors of power and the desert tents, proving that destiny sometimes needs to be challenged to reveal its true purpose. The arranged marriage, which once was Aisha's prison, was now a distant memory, replaced by the promise of a union forged by love and choice, a bridge between two worlds that met in the heart of one another. The years that followed wove a new destiny for Aisha and Omar, a destiny as intricate and beautiful as the rugs she crafted. The palace in Dubai, once a maze of formalities for Aisha, transformed into a vibrant home where the simplicity of the desert and the splendor of the city met in harmony. Omar not only protected her from conventions, he redefined them alongside her, showing the world that true power lies in the courage to love and the wisdom to value the soul over status. Aisha's art flourished in ways she had never imagined in her small village. With Omar's unwavering support, who saw her talent not as a pastime, but as an invaluable cultural treasure, she founded the Al-Waha Center for Ancestral Arts. It was not merely a workshop, but a sanctuary for preserving ancient weaving techniques, a space where women from diverse backgrounds, from desert dunes to Dubai's skyscrapers, could learn, create, and find their own voice through threads. Aisha, the weaver who once fled, was now a respected mentor, an inspiration to hundreds. Her hands, once marked by the anxiety of escape, now guided others in transforming wool into legacy, just as she transformed her own flight into a journey of self-discovery and love. The rugs produced by the center were more than decorative pieces. They were living narratives, exported to art galleries worldwide, telling stories of resilience, identity, and the union of cultures. Each color, each pattern spoke of a bridge built between the old and the new, between tradition and freedom. Omar, for his part, also changed. The billionaire Sheikh, once immersed in negotiations and the coldness of power, found a new and profound purpose. He directed part of his vast fortune and influence towards sustainable development projects in desert communities, including Aisha's now thriving village. He built schools that taught both modern mathematics and ancestral history, hospitals offering state-of-the-art healthcare, and programs promoting education and female empowerment. The thirst for profit and the ostentation of luxury were replaced by a genuine pursuit of impact and legacy. He traded some of his social engagements for regular visits to the villages, sitting with elders, listening to their stories, and investing in solutions that truly improved the lives of their people. His gaze, once distant and calculating, now radiated a warm compassion, a depth that only true love and shared purpose can carve. He had learned from Aisha that true wealth was not in what one possessed, but in what one gave, in what one built with love and dedication. The greatest proof of their union, however, came with the arrival of their two children, a boy and a girl, who carried in their eyes the blend of the desert's resilience and Dubai's bright intelligence. They were the living bridge between their parents' worlds, the future that Aisha and Omar had dared to dream of. The eldest son, with his father's seriousness and his mother's curiosity, already showed a fascination for the stories told in the rugs and for managing the lands. The daughter, with Aisha's vivacity and Omar's sweetness, loved spending hours beside the loom, her small, curious hands exploring the colorful threads, listening to the legends her mother wove into each piece. They were the melody of a new tradition, forged not by imposition but by choice, by love, and mutual respect. Growing up in a home that celebrated individuality and the strength of unity. But fate, in its infinite wisdom, likes to weave new threads, to place new souls before similar crossroads, proving that certain struggles are timeless, even in a constantly changing world. Years after Aisha's escape, on a sunny morning at one of Dubai's most luxurious cafes, a young woman sat with her eyes fixed on a vibrant rug adorning the wall. It was an authentic piece from the Al-Waha Center, full of colors and symbols of freedom that seemed to whisper ancient and new stories. The young woman, dressed in modern and elegant attire but with a traditional ring on her ring finger, appeared lost in thought. She held a tablet, the screen displaying a message from her father about an important family meeting scheduled for that afternoon. In her eyes was the same mixture of resignation and longing that Aisha once carried. She knew the meeting was not about business, but about an arranged marriage, a destiny she felt was not hers, a gilded cage that awaited her. Her fingers touched the carpet, feeling the texture of the wool, and a slight smile of recognition appeared on her lips. She did not know the full story behind that piece, but she felt it in her soul, like a distant call, an echo of a courage she longed to possess. On the table beside her, a newspaper was open, and the photo of Aisha, now a mature and confident woman next to Omar, smiled from the page. The headline spoke about the expansion of the Al-Waha Center and the legacy of an artist who defied traditions to find love and freedom. The young woman read the article, and with every word, a spark of hope ignited in her heart. The desert had changed, and Dubai had evolved. But the fight for love and freedom, for finding one's own voice, was an eternal melody that continued to echo in new hearts, inspiring them to weave their own destinies. In that lavish cafe, where the murmur of conversations blended with the clinking of porcelain cups, the young woman felt the weight of a traditional ring on her finger, not as an ornament, but as an invisible shackle. The newspaper article, featuring the image of Aisha and Omar, was a mirror reflecting her own tumultuous soul. The story of the weaver from Al-Waha was not just news. It was a whisper of courage, a melody of hope resonating within her own oppressed heart. She, like Aisha once, was about to be given away in an arranged marriage, a union of convenience promising security and alliance between powerful families in Dubai, yet threatening to suffocate her very essence. Her name was Zara, and she bore the burden of an ancient lineage, lofty expectations, and a future that seemed predetermined, leaving no room for personal choice. From childhood, she had been shaped for her role, taught to value tradition, honor, and duty above all else. But in the silence of her room, amidst poetry books and the brushes with which she painted abstract landscapes, Zara dreamed of a life where love was not a negotiation, but a discovery, where her art was not a pastime but the expression of her soul. She cherished the beauty of her culture, yet felt that the walls of her father's palace, no matter how gilded, could not contain the vastness of her own desires. The important family meeting scheduled for that afternoon was the sealing of her fate. She knew the names, titles, and fortunes involved. She knew the man waiting for her was respectable, powerful, a good match, but he was a stranger, an equation of duty, not of heart. How could she surrender to someone who would accept her as a trophy, a piece on a social chessboard, rather than as the woman who painted sunset's colors on hidden canvases? Doubt was a slow poison, corroding the resignation she tried to impose on herself. Zara's eyes returned to the tapestry on the cafe wall, a work of art that seemed to vibrate with life of its own. She touched the wool, feeling the history in every thread. There lay the proof that Aisha hadn't merely fled. She had woven a new reality, one where her art and her love could coexist. The newspaper headline spoke of a legacy, of an arts center that empowered women, of a sheikh who had forsaken some of his luxury for a greater purpose. It was a narrative that challenged everything Zara had learned, one that invited her to question what was unbreakable. The spark of hope that ignited in her heart was small but persistent. She wondered, what if Aisha's greatest mistake, her escape, was actually her greatest success? What if her own escape, though silent and internal, could be the beginning of something new, a life where she was not just the daughter or the bride, but Zara, the artist, the woman who chose her own path? Fear was a giant, but the image of Aisha, smiling confidently beside Omar, was a powerful weapon against it. Zara felt an urgency she had never experienced before. She didn't want Aisha's life. She wanted Aisha's courage. She wanted the freedom to choose, to love, to be loved for who she truly was. The clock was ticking, the time for the family gathering slipping away, and the pressure mounting. She stood up, the newspaper still in her hands, her mind brimming with possibilities. What would she do? Accept the destiny imposed on her, or dare to weave her own path? Inspired by the eternal melody of love and freedom that echoed in her heart, the paths of the desert and the city had intertwined in unexpected ways. And the story of Aisha and Omar was not an isolated tale, but a beacon for those still seeking their own light. Zara felt she was on the edge of an abyss, but for the first time, it was not an abyss of fear, but of possibilities. The decision she was about to make would not be easy, but it would be hers. And perhaps, in a not-so-distant future, Her own story would be told, inspiring another young woman in some cafe to touch a tapestry and find the strength to challenge her own fate. Aisha's legacy was not just in the tapestries that adorned the walls, but in the souls she had unknowingly freed. Zara felt the weight of the traditional ring on her finger, not as an ornament, but as a promise of a future that didn't belong to her. The image of Aisha, smiling with the certainty of someone who had found her place, was a mirror to her own restless soul. Zara didn't want Aisha's life, with its escapes and challenges, but she longed for the indomitable courage the weaver had shown, the freedom to choose, to love, to be loved for who she truly was. The cafe clock marked the final minutes before the family gathering. Each tick was a reminder of the fate that awaited her, a fate she now realized was a gilded cage. She looked again at the newspaper headline, at the story of a woman who had dared to defy the unbreakable. What if what seemed like a mistake, a disobedience, guise, was actually the first step toward her true freedom? What if the voice of her heart, silenced for years by tradition and expectation, was the only guide that truly mattered? Zara took a deep breath, feeling a newfound strength, an echo of the desert's resilience that lived in Aisha's rugs. She would not accept the arranged marriage. She would no longer be just a pawn on her family's chessboard. She stood up, the newspaper still in her hands, the decision etched into her soul. It would be difficult, yes. She would face fury, disapproval, perhaps misunderstanding. But for the first time, she wasn't running away. She was choosing. She was weaving her own thread, her own story, inspired by the eternal melody of love and freedom that Aisha had sung. Aisha and Omar's story wasn't just a love tale. It was a testament that fate sometimes pushes us down winding paths so we can find our true home. What seems like a mistake, a desperate escape, could be the invisible hand guiding us toward our deepest rightness, toward the most authentic version of ourselves. They proved that the greatest riches aren't those inherited, but those built with courage, soul, and a love that defies all borders. And you, who have accompanied us on this journey, have you ever stopped to think about your own mistakes that, in the end, turned out to be the greatest successes of your life? Those unexpected detours that rewrote your story into something far more meaningful? Share your experience in the comments below. If this narrative of courage and true love touched your heart, leave a like, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more inspiring stories, and hit the bell to receive all the updates. Until the next journey, where fate and heart meet.